Number 62 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, January 18, 2023, the committee is meeting on the study of federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey & Co. And colleagues, we'll start off, I apologize, there is a bit of a change to the original schedule. Ms. Bonin will be sharing the beginning time with Mr. Wernick instead of splitting 1 hour and 1 hour. So we'll have two opening statements, and we'll start with Mr. Wernick, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the committee for the opportunity to come and have an exchange today. I'm very pleased to be invited. Hope to be helpful to your study, and I've come at it with three perspectives. One, I am now working part-time at the University of Ottawa on public sector management issues, not what government does, but how it does it. And you can find a series of articles, podcasts, and interviews on my LinkedIn feed if you're curious. Second, unlike my fellow academics in the field, I was an executive in the public service for 28 years, a deputy minister for 17, and head of the public service for 3. So I have some experience in getting work done with the issues associated with using external contractors and indeed managing public servants. And third, I have done a handful of small consulting gigs over the past 3 years since I left government, and I have a little bit of exposure to the world of consulting firms and the perspectives of suppliers. I sent the committee clerk a while ago 2 articles I wrote earlier this year, and I hope you've had them. One was on February 7th in Policy Options, and it's about the use of outside contractors, and the other was on February 11th in the Globe and Mail, which makes some suggestions on how to strengthen public sector capacity. In the interest of your time, I won't go over my Policy Options article in any detail. Happy to take questions. The short takeaway is that the issue is not whether to use outside suppliers of services, but how to use them for best effect. One of the things I do want to say on the record is that you're not bystanders on this, that some of the demand for the use of consultants comes from elected politicians, and always will. I worked with several ministers over the years from both sides who were instinctively skeptical of public service advice or their delivery skills and wanted validation from an outside perspective. I don't see that ever changing, and there's nothing wrong with it. No elected politicians will ever want to be completely dependent on the public service, and nor should they be. They would always want outside perspective from time to time. In the discussion that broke out earlier this year, concerns have been raised about the public sector's potential dependency on outside help, and that's a valid concern. Concerns about getting value for money for taxpayers are valid. Concerns about the ongoing capability of the public sector is valid, and I wish drew more sustained and consistent attention. Personally, I don't buy the gloom and doom diagnostic that's been running over the last few months, at least not in full. But if you choose to buy into that diagnostic, the question that arises is, what will you do about it? You are people with influence, members of the government, members of a government in waiting. I've made a number of suggestions in the piece I wrote for the Globe and Mail, and I have more if you're interested. First, we do not need a one-off royal commission on the public service. We need a more robust supply chain and a variety of sources of ideas and innovation, not just about policy, but especially about management. The committee could, and I encourage you, endorse any or all of the 5 measures that I proposed in my Globe and Mail piece. Create a new House-Senate committee on the public service. Recreate the advisory committee to the Prime Minister that existed in the past. Ramp up interchanges between the public service and other sectors to at least 100 people in each direction each year. Create a better government fund of about $20 million a year to generate ideas and a safe place for debating them in universities, think tanks, and foundations. And use the Council of the Federation and other fora to bring together federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous governments on common work plans and agendas for a more effective public sector for Canada. And here's another one that's my reaction to the recent budget. It isn't good enough to just set a target to spend less on consultants. That's a classic half measure. The other half that is missing is a commitment to double the annual investment in training and leadership development within the public service. I would like to see a commitment to protect training and leadership development budgets when the operating budgets are cut by 3% in the coming years. And you should ask the government for that commitment. You could ask the Parliamentary Budget Office to provide you with a thorough baseline study of what the government spends on training and leadership development, both in-house and from external suppliers. What does it spend to reinvest and recapitalize its most important asset, its labor force? My recommendation to you as a committee is that the next big study you take on should be about the capability of the public service, how to sustain it, how to improve it. Instead of always looking back, look forward, think about future-proofing, call witnesses, make implementable recommendations, and call for a government response. And I would like to see all political parties make at least 3 specific implementable commitments in their platforms in the coming election that speak to how they would improve public sector capacity. Not generalities, specific commitments. You can believe in big government, limited government, a more expansive role for the federal government and the Federation, a more limited role for the federal government and the Federation, but I hope you all agree that Canadians want good government. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to take your questions later.
Mr. Wernick, Ms. Bonin, please, for 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président et membres du comité, merci pour m'avoir invité à contribuer au travail du comité. I'm a fellow certified management consultant. Offrir des faits contextuels par rapport à mon travail durant mon temps à McKinsey pour le gouvernement du Canada. Mais en premier, je voudrais partager avec le comité un peu sur mon cheminement et sur mon histoire.
Sorry, one moment. Our translation seems to be working.
It is now, sir. Please. I should have given you a little bit forewarning, Mr. Chair.
A member of the Canadian Armed Forces. I was commissioned in June 1988 at the age of 16. I was educated at the Royal Military College of Canada, graduating with a Bachelor of Chemical and Materials Engineering and trained as a naval engineering officer. I served on multiple training deployments at sea as a naval engineering officer. I was one of the first females to serve as a commissioned officer in a combat role on our Canadian ships. I was also educated at the Royal Naval Engineering College of the British Navy. At the time, they had no women serving as engineering officers. My service to my country remains among my proudest achievements to this day. During my time with the Canadian Armed Forces, I experienced firsthand the sacrifices that our serving members and their families have to make for the benefits of all Canadians. In particular, many other incredible women have done the hard work of carving out an equal space for all gender in the Canadian Armed Forces over long and memorable careers. I'm so proud to have played a small role in this early in my professional life. After I left the military, I continued my public service in different ways and currently serve on the boards of the True Patriot Love Foundation, the Invictus Games 2025, and the Royal Ottawa Hospital Institute for Mental Health Research. I have always viewed my role as a consultant as an extension of my desire to serve. The modern challenges our society faces are complex and sometimes require expertise and capacity which might not exist in the public service. This is why having consulting organizations that are able to step in and assist the public service when necessary is important. It is every consultant's duty to know when value can really be created. It is also equally important for us as consultants to transfer our skills and capabilities for the public sector to be sustainable on its own. This has and remains a top priority for all the consulting engagements which I have been involved with. I was hired by McKinsey in 2018 to focus on the public sector. I'd already been working in public sector consulting for over 22 years and had established myself as an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And McKinsey was already serving public sector clients, and the firm thought that our Canadian government might benefit from McKinsey's global expertise in certain sector areas. So when a rapid response was needed to the issues occurring within the military's internal culture, for example, McKinsey was able to provide the tools needed to assist. As a female who had previously been in the armed forces, I had firsthand experience with defense's internal culture. Both myself and my McKinsey Global Qualified Expert have training experience in conducting trauma-informed investigations and interviews. We led or participated in a series of consultation with quite a few people from a wide range of defense and armed forces personnel. And many of those interview subjects were impacted by gender or racially based discrimination and harassment. As such, it was important we gather their important perspectives in an independent, external, and trauma-informed manner. Through this collection of data and expert analysis, concrete recommendations on how to improve the culture were made for the benefit of not only our military, but all Canadians. It is my firm view that the work I perform as a partner at McKinsey with the Government of Canada was a valuable and ethical contribution. I look forward to answering your questions today and hope to assist the committee in its work. Je suis prête à répondre à vos questions aujourd'hui pour assister le travail du comité.
I look forward to answering your questions and assist the committee in its work.
Changing your schedules a bit to accommodate our committee. Ms. Kusi, for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the witnesses for their appearance today. Madame Bonan, I'm very impressed by all your accomplishments. I myself have 15 years of service with the Global Affairs. It's foreign service. It's not the same as a defense establishment, but I think we may have some experience in common.
You had with the Government of Canada that did you work on?
I don't have that information as part of having left the McKinsey. You'll appreciate I no longer have access to any files, any contracts. I believe you have that answer, and you'll have to go back to McKinsey to kind of get that specific information.
I would love to have that answer in the documents. Unfortunately, we don't have the documentation as of yet. What was your role specifically in these contracts, Madame Bonan?
There were many different types of role, sometimes coaching the team, sometimes leading the engagement, sometimes providing expertise.
And how were these particular contracts assigned to you?
All of the contracts that were awarded to McKinsey were done based on the competitive rules and procurement process of the Government of Canada.
While employed with McKinsey and Company, did you ever have discussions, either in writing, in personal, phone, or virtual, with the staff of the Prime Minister's office?
No, I did not.
Did you ever have discussions with the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Katie Telford?
No, I did not.
In the internal audits conducted on the Government of Canada's contract with McKinsey and Company, there were many irregularities found in the procurement processes. And for the contracts with the Department of National Defense, they found that there was no formal justification made for a sole source contract, and payments were made even before work was completed. Why do you think so many irregularities with the procurement processes were found in contracts with McKinsey?
I saw the audit reports. Unfortunately, I no longer have access to any of those files, so it was hard for me. It's hard for me to comment on that. All I can say is that McKinsey, in conducting work with the government, would have strictly abided by the requirements that were put in front of us by the government, whether it is a signature or anything else of that matter.
Do you think that McKinsey gets special treatment with the Government of Canada contracts compared to other consulting firms?
No.
All right. While at McKinsey, did you do work for other defense departments around the world?
No, I did not.
Do you have colleagues at McKinsey who worked on these contracts for the Department of National Defense as well as for other national defense departments of other countries?
To my knowledge, and again, I don't have access to all of the, I'm working from memory, only for allied nations if there were anybody that came to the table and advised the Department of National Defense.
Okay. We know McKinsey has done work for China Communications Construction, which militarized islands in the South China Sea, as well as Rostec, which has produced missiles for Russia. How does McKinsey ensure that information gained from these contracts with the Department of National Defense are not shared with other departments or other agencies? Could you give us some insight as to that process, please?
Well, first and foremost, I should just emphasize the fact that my work was solely focused to only working with the public sector here in Canada. And second, we would absolutely 100% abide by the policies, the rules, the guardrails that are imposed by us as per our contractual agreements with the Government of Canada.
Were there conversations at the time of your departure with the government as to the potential for further contracts with McKinsey and the current government?
Further contracts?
Yes, that's right. So in addition to the contracts you worked on, were there conversations about other potential contracts?
Well, McKinsey was serving, the Government of Canada before and after I left. So I am not aware of specific conversations, but I would assume that perhaps there was some work underway that was, being fairly competed again.
In your experience, is it normal for McKinsey staff to have high-level conversations with political staff?
During my time at McKinsey, no, I never had conversations directly with ministers or political staff, and it is my knowledge that for the work that I was involved, those conversations did not occur as well.
Then who would give you the direction as to the scope of the projects that you were working on? Who were your liaisons within government?
Well, we responded to open, transparent, competitive processes, and as all other management consulting firm would. And
But who specifically? It's not clear to me. Who were you reporting to in the government?
So for the competitive process, as this committee knows, there are postings, and then we see the
No, during the project itself, who was your touch point in the government?
Oh, sorry about that. My apologies. There would always be a lead on, that was responsible.
Who was that lead? Who was that lead in the government?
Well, it depends on the project.
Can you give me an example of people you talked to on the
We're
lead?
going to have to wait for your next round.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Housefather, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Wernick, I'm going to turn to you first, if that's okay, given that we've been diverted from what was a very, I think, important study on outsourcing and looking at where we could limit outsourcing to, to better make use of our public service, to a study about McKinsey and allegations of political interference that continue to be debunked. But since you were the clerk of the Privy Council at the time that the contracts with McKinsey increased, I'd like to ask you, sir, did you, in the 2017, 2018, 2019 period, did you ever get political instruction to increase the amount of contracts with McKinsey?
I left government 4 years ago, and in my position as clerk, I had no line of sight to contracting other than contracting that was done by the Privy Council office, which I had to sign off on from time to time. We had some technology contracts, to improve business processes and IT at Privy Council office. But contracts are let by any of the 300 federal organizations, and the day-to-day supervision of them is usually done by middle managers like directors general, directors, and assistant deputy ministers.
But as the person on the top of the organization, you would have some oversight responsibilities. Did you ever receive any political instruction to divert contracts to McKinsey or to favor one company over another in any type of contract?
Public service comes from the Treasury Board of Canada, Treasury Board Secretariat. So that would have been the line of sight into contracting policy and those sorts of areas. No, I received no direction or discussion regarding contracting in my time as clerk or indeed as deputy minister.
And do you have any reason to believe that any of the contracts that were issued to McKinsey or to other consulting firms such as Deloitte, were done improperly in any way? Whether or not, we think that the amounts are too high, different question, but do you have any belief that there was anything improper in the process?
I have no reason to comment on anything that happened after April 2019.
I'm talking about the period while you were there.
No, I have no reason to. Contracting was run by contracting officers and the administrative units of the various departments, including PCO.
I understand that. Had you ever observed anything improper in terms of the contracting units while you were in your position?
Absolutely no, of course not.
Okay, perfect. And certainly, because if you would have taken action.
Of course.
So let me then, moving away from McKinsey, since as I understand it, you have no specific knowledge that there was anything irregular with any of the contracts with McKinsey. Can you talk to us about why somebody owning proprietary information may be a reason for sole sourcing, because that was the issue in a couple of the McKinsey contracts?
Most management consultants are brought in the area of management. A good chunk of that, as you heard, is in information management and information technology, but there are other areas, business processes, costing, risk management, service issues like queue management, customer relationships, cyber security, protection of privacy, all kinds of management and delivery issues. And it's quite possible that a firm, which could be very small, could be very large, would have developed processes or techniques which were proprietary. That wouldn't surprise me.
Thank you. And you also had the opportunity to observe the integrity regime that was put in place. Do you have any recommendations related to the integrity regime as it is right now, or at least as it was when you left? I don't think it's markedly, there's been a few changes, but can you sort of give me an overview of what you think might or need to be changed in the current integrity regime that disqualifies certain companies from doing business with Canada?
It's not an area of expertise. I think you might want to talk to former secretaries of the Treasury Board, but I mean, it's a combination of policy instruments. Transparency has always been the most important thing in Canada. So simply the existence of all the contracts, the proactive disclosure of every contract, which allows Canadians, parliamentarians, journalists, competitors to provide feedback and call out anything that they think is untoward. There are officers, there's a procurement ombudsperson who looks at the contracting process, and all government contracting is subject to our trade agreements, NAFTA, CETA, TPP, and is watched like a hawk by our trading partners, and there are international processes for challenging the award of contracts if it's seen to be in any way not fair to bidders from other countries and so on. So there's a lot there already. I don't have any specific recommendations on how it could be tweaked or improved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have left?
52 seconds.
Okay. Mr. Wernick, one last question. The contracting processes, and again, I know this is not necessarily your number one area of expertise, but the contracting processes within the Government of Canada, the way we go out to tender, the way we contract. There have been a lot of allegations about, again, that have come up. My observation has been that this is undertaken by people who are very, very serious professionals with lots of experience in the matter that really do their best. Has that generally been your viewpoint in terms of watching how the contracting process in the government goes?
Public servants that are relevant here, there are people that work in contracting and procurement, buying goods and services on behalf of Canadians, or for the Government of Canada. And then there are people that are the project managers of whatever those goods and services are going to be used for, and both might get involved. So it could be an IT renovation project, it could be a service delivery project, it could be any number of areas. So those are skill sets, they're professions, and that is why I talked about the need for more training.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Mrs. Vinola for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le...
Thank you very much, Chair. Madame Bonin, thank you very much for your service to the country through the forces. I'm sure it was never very easy or simple to carve out a place for yourself, and I think that your CV is mighty impressive. That lived experience also would have been very useful to you when there was the study on the allegations of abuse or harassment in the services. Now, during your service at National Defense, were there individuals who were capable of conducting the type of services that McKinsey provided? Well, the point is that they wanted an outside independent party. This is why the forces themselves sought assistance outside. Justice Arbour Would you not consider her an external observer? Yes. Her report indicated that it should be a further study and consultations, and that the Canadian forces should take a look at the capacities required to accomplish the task. From your perspective, McKinsey was conducting its report approximately simultaneously as the time of Madame Arbour's. Do you think that that was redundant spending? No. Justice Arbour's study was done for the chief consultant officer on culture. Our McKinsey study, they decided they needed help for further. So her subject, Madame Arbour's, was quite different from what the defense minister was looking for. Madame Arbour, in her report, was quite clear with what she thought of the results of McKinsey's report. What was your reaction to her comments about the McKinsey report? Well, the job isn't quite complete, I don't think. She took a position on the McKinsey project, but it's only a part of the project that's complete. So I don't think she was really in a position to come to a solid conclusion, perhaps a little bit later when the program is more advanced, but it's still underway and under the leadership of of CAF. And when Mr. Barton appeared before us, he informed us that once McKinsey withdrew from discipline and area, they would leave behind the skills into the corporate culture, transfer the skills, whether processes or tools. So what did you do after your study for the D&D? Well, that's a very critical point, in fact. As I mentioned in my opening comments, the objective was to accompany our clients and their employees how to continue doing this work. So that's how one transforms a corporate culture. We did this with workshops, consultation. We were always accompanying members of the forces who they were in charge of picking up the work afterwards. Well, we often hear phrases from women is boys will always be boys. Do you feel that that is still thematically correct in the forces today? Well, I don't think it's my place to see if that is still the case. I have my own personal experience, but that was prior. And I think that for the committee, I think that I wouldn't be the person to answer that question. When the budget was announced, the Vice Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, same person, said there's going to be a significant reduction in the amount spent on outside consultants, but that would change absolutely nothing in the quality of the services offered to the Canadian public. Was not one of the objectives of these contracts to improve services to Canadians? And to say we're not going to offer any more contracts, but that won't change anything for the quality of service. How do you respond to a statement like that? I believe you'll always need management consultants. As we've seen during the pandemic, we needed quite a lot of them. It all depends on what's going on. If there's a war, if there's a pandemic, you might need that extra expertise. So it's very difficult to say how much should be spent for management consultants. One would hope that this did not disrupt service to Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you both for being here at the committee, and thank you both for your service to Canada and your public life working for Canada. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Warnick, if I could. In your role as Clerk of the Privy Council and head of the Federal Public Service, was there ever a conversation between yourself and the Prime Minister, or between yourself and any minister, about using third-party contracting services to implement parts of the government's agenda?
Conversation. There's always a mix of public servants and outside services in just about every initiative by every government.
Was there ever a conversation about the amount that departments were spending on third-party contracts to implement promises made by the government?
No.
Okay. So I guess, here, Deloitte, for example, 2015, 2016, when you were the head of the Privy Council, about $11 million was put out to them in outsourcing. That grew to $38 million under your watch, and now it's at $206 million. PricewaterhouseCoopers, grew, now it's $102 million. KPMG's at $45 million. Like, these are numbers that have gone up, like, in some cases 20-fold, 10-fold. Do you have concerns when you see this kind of numbers growing in outsourcing?
I can't speak to anything that happened after April 2019.
Yeah.
I watched the debate, and I think that some of it is a kind of a false debate that suggests there's sort of a teeter-totter that work would be done by the public service or consultants as if it's a fixed pie. What I read into the numbers is that there's more work to go around, that there is more activity, more projects at a faster pace. So both the number of public servants has grown, which is a concern to some people, and the use of external contractors has grown, which is a concern to other people.
So you're not worried about the long-term capacity of
I'm extremely concerned about the long-term capacity of the public service, and that's what I'm working on, and that's what I spoke about in my opening remarks.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a bit more about that, actually, if you had suggestions right now for the Government of Canada.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some pointed thoughts on how we could proceed.
Well, as I said, I would start with, if you buy into the diagnostic that there's a growing dependency on consultants, then you should be investing in the training of public servants, especially middle and senior managers. Just anecdotally, way back when I was an assistant deputy minister, I went to MIT. I took their 4-day course on IT for non-IT managers. It helped me for quite a while. There's project management skills, risk management skills, all sorts of things. And I would ask, just as a benchmark, that whatever that number is that the government is spending on training and leadership development, and the PBO can help you benchmark it, double it.
Are you giving advice to any of these companies? McKinsey, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Accenture, KPMG?
No, I'm a teeny little competitor. I do a few projects for MMP, a Western Canadian firm.
Okay. Do you have concerns when you hear that there's former cabinet ministers like, the Honourable Peter MacKay, the Honourable Pierre Pettigrew, that are now working as senior advisor to Deloitte, and you see these skyrocketing contracts given that they were cabinet ministers?
Well, even former cabinet ministers may have some expertise to offer to current governments. That part doesn't trouble me. And a lot of them are embedded in Canadian law firms and on retainers and so on. If the implication is that it affects bidding and contracting, no, I do not have concerns.
From an optics perspective for Canadians, obviously ministers have knowledge that certainly members of Parliament, most of them wouldn't have, never mind the general public, in terms of access. You don't have any concerns that they would be privy to knowledge that would help guide these consulting companies to accelerate their opportunities within government?
Well, there are post-employment rules for former public office holders, both former ministers and former public servants. So there are periods at which they cannot be involved in their former responsibilities, and there are lobbyist rules, lobbyist registration, and there is an ethics commissioner.
You can provide advice to a company indirectly, though.
Well, I think former ministers and former public office holders are always under the scrutiny of the ethics commissioner.
Okay. Do you believe that, the Government of Canada can achieve an ambitious public policy without having to rely on third-party for-profit companies? Because these are for-profit companies.
No. I mean, there's simply, it's not possible that all of the skill sets and expertise that the Government of Canada needs are already embedded in the public service. They have to come in from the practices of other governments, the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. How else will they come into the public sector if not through advisory companies?
Just seeing that the amount of profits that are made, like these are companies that are obviously ground in profits and exceptional profits in some cases. Do you believe that the Government of Canada could reduce these costs by providing more in-house services?
Yeah, as I said, I
money.
don't think it's a simple zero sum, but I think that there are certainly things that could be done in-house by public servants, and certainly managing outside suppliers more effectively is one of them. There's no right mix. Right now, ballpark, the government spends something around $50 billion on its public service and $15 billion on contractors. That could be a little more or less on both sides. It's always going to be a mix, and that's a judgment call that has to be exercised by governments.
But it's shifted significantly.
I'm afraid that's our time, Mr. Johns. Mr. Barrett or Ms. Cusi? Ms. Cusi for 5, please.
Thank you, Chair. Madame Bonnet, to go back to it, you said, so who were your contacts when you were working on the project? You've mentioned mostly the project within defense, but your title was Social Healthcare Public and Education Leader, which seems to me that it would go beyond the defense portfolio. So who were your contacts then with these projects within the government? Who specifically?
There's always a lead project authority that is put in play, and if I'm the leader on the engagement, that I do interact with this person. Most often, the clients will also pull together a steering committee of public servants, and there will be a formal reporting to that committee to sort of seek input on sort of the progress of the work. So as a lead on an engagement, these are mainly the people that I would be personally interacting with.
Have you ever communicated with a member of cabinet? Ever? Have you ever communicated with a member of cabinet?
No, my only interaction with ministers or political staff is strictly been in the context of my philanthropy work, and it was never one-on-one conversation, and it was not about the work of McKinsey or any other management consulting work that I've ever done.
Who have you been in communication with regarding your philanthropy work?
I have not been in communication with, but I have been at events where there have been ministers and or political staff. And again, in the context of those events, whether it is the True Pritchard Love Gala or something like that, I would have strictly just been there as to greet them and to thank them for the support.
Have you ever been at an event with Madam Telford?
If I have, sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Have you ever been at an event with Katie Telford?
No. Well, not that I recall. I don't know her personally.
Okay. During your time in your role as social health care public and education leader, business with the government, current government of Canada, and McKinsey increased significantly. What do you attribute this to?
Well, the first piece being, as I said in my opening remark, when I joined the firm, while McKinsey had already been serving the government at the federal and provincial level and other parts of the public sector, it was done opportunistically. The government, McKinsey thought that it would be a really good thing to serve the government of Canada more fully, that they could benefit from certain expertise that McKinsey could bring to the table. And for me, I was the first partner to join the firm to be 100% focused on doing that. If you combine that with the unprecedented changes that have occurred over the last 3 and 4 years, namely a pandemic, a war, geopolitical instability, I think what you will see is that McKinsey is not an anomaly. The public sector had to lean in on various firms in order to either get specific expertise at a point in time, and or just in some cases it was just pure capacity. So what happened to McKinsey is not really unlike, what happened with the other firms.
Okay. So to be clear, if we receive all of the unredacted documentation and we review all of the unredacted documentation, we will not see communications between yourself and ministers, and we will not see communications between yourself and the Prime Minister's staff.
There is no communication in my time, in my work at McKinsey, where you will see any communication with those two parties.
Okay. In your experience, have any consulting firms ever, or has McKinsey ever provided recommendations that were considered by Cabinet?
In my work at McKinsey, we do make recommendation to the public servants that we are making those recommendations with. They are not public policy recommendation because it is strictly not the role of consultants to do so. The public servant are the ones who are to present those to Cabinet in whatever form, shape, form, and or package it. We do the assessment, we do the work, and it is the public servants to do so.
And my final question would be then, have recommendations from your firm and your firm to Cabinet through these other intermediary levels provide advice on what to do and not just to suggest how they do it?
No. The work that management consulting firm will do is assess a situation and, come up with observation that can then get turned into recommendation by the public servant. Strictly not the management consulting firm.
Thank you. That is our time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms.
Merci.
Thompson, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. If I could begin with you, please, Mr. Wernick. Ensuring proper information management is essential to efficient access of information systems. Do you believe that improving training and digitizing storage of contract information for D&D contracts will improve the existing disclosure structure?
Necessary, but far from sufficient to improve the ATIP process. I was at another parliamentary committee in December that's studying the access to information process, and I made specific recommendations to that committee as well.
Thank you. What kind of expertise does outsourcing let the government access that it doesn't have in-house? I know you referenced this before, but just for the record.
I was a senior executive. I was a deputy minister for 17 years. I never saw management consulting firms get involved in policy development, ever. It's just not their wheelhouse, at least up to the point at which I left government. That's my experience. Where they have been helpful to government departments and agencies is in management and service delivery. They have global client bases and international rosters of expertise, or they're small firms with niche expertise. And so they tend to get involved to provide an outside perspective on business processes, governance, organizational maturity, costing, risk management. A lot is on service issues, queue management, customer relationships, web and app design, security, cybersecurity. I could go on, but it's basically that is the wheelhouse, is services and management issues that you see most of the activity of the firm. And if I've read the articles properly, about a third of the use of external contractors is in the world of IM and IT, which, as you know, has completely changed. There was no iPhone in 2007, so government has been catching up and keeping up with technology. And you're aware of a discussion that's underway right now about GPT and artificial intelligence. So keeping up with what's happening in technology is one of the bigger challenges for the public sector.
Thank you. The audit and the procurement ombudsman recommended that due diligence be strengthened, which the department agreed to. Do you believe that this will rectify future compliance issues in the administrative process?
I'm qualified to have an opinion on that. You might want to talk to one of the secretaries of the Treasury Board that's more involved in the nuts and bolts of procurement and contracting. You can always invest more in due diligence and hindsight and after-action review. We have about 14 officers and agents of Parliament employing over 2,000 people that look at what has been done. My plea is invest in thinking about the future as well.
Thank you. Ms. Bonin, if I could just move to you for a couple of very quick questions. Did McKinsey compete to provide the best service in order to win the contracts? And if so, isn't this how the free market is intended to work?
In the work that I was involved at McKinsey, the work was all fairly competed, and McKinsey ended up being the selected option based on a thorough set of processes that our government of Canada imposes on us in order to get to that selection.
Thank you. And for the record, I'll try to get this one in quickly. How would you characterize McKinsey's relationship with the federal government?
In the work that I was involved, we had a great, healthy, respectful relationship with our clients. And really, our primary purpose was to serve them in order to offer better services to Canadians.
Thank you. And how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
50 seconds, 5-0.
Okay. So I put myself on mute. If I could go back to you, Mr. Wernick, very quickly, and again, this is for the record. Did you provide advice to ministers concerning contracts to McKinsey? And this is when obviously you were with government.
Never. No, never.
No, okay, thank you. Sure. And also, to your knowledge, has McKinsey made recommendations to the federal government that were considered at cabinet? And if so, what were they?
Not to my knowledge. It's hard to know where the inputs of advice, end up. Nothing really comes to cabinet as a recommendation that isn't a signed recommendation from one of the members of cabinet as a memorandum to cabinet, and there are lots of inputs. Including stakeholders and consultations and all kinds of ways. At the end of the day, it is the minister who signs the recommendation to cabinet who's accountable for the advice and recommendations to their colleagues.
That is our time. Welcome, Ms. Sinclair Deguenet, my colleague from Public Accounts. You have 2.5 short minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon to our witnesses. I'm replacing a colleague today, and I'm somewhat familiar with the issue. I was part of my career was involved in that area. I have a question in mind, and it should be addressed to you, Madame Bonnet. Would you agree with the fact that there's a certain conflict of interest between a desire to transfer expertise following a project or a contract with the federal government, and at the same time, the need, if you wish to renew a contract, to have more skills to continue transferring? Yeah, I can appreciate that there seems to be a perceived conflict of interest, but all I can say, it is not the objective of any consultants to just simply renew a contract. The transfer of skills occurs in the majority of cases, and what happens, our clients do not renew a contract when it's evident that we've done what we could, and we're not going to add any further value. So it's all on value added. But value added is not necessarily a transfer of skills or expertise. You have that value when there's an absence of skills within the organization. Well, the value is when we can resolve a complex situation which cannot be resolved within the public service. The concept of transfer of knowledge in our business, we concentrate on the next major complex problem, and we're not looking backwards, we're looking forward. Well, how do you expect that there's been an increased demand for contracts with consultants? If the skill transfer occurred, there shouldn't be that need for more contracts.
You have a flight to catch, and that is our 2.5 minutes. Mr. Johns, please.
Thanks. I'm just going to continue on that because I think there's some really important questions around that, and maybe you can help us, Ms. Bonin, in terms of the shifts that you're seeing in management consulting. I mean, obviously with these numbers growing, these consulting companies are building infrastructure to respond to the demand. And this is to go from 11 million with Deloitte to 206 million. That's 20-fold. To scale up is just significantly, a big task for even a consulting firm. Can you speak about what you're seeing in terms of the changing consulting world to respond to government need, and also, again, back to the transfer of knowledge? Because if the transfer of knowledge is happening, why are they still employing these large consulting firms?
I'm afraid I'm not in a position to talk about all of the firms in the industry, and it is not my area of expertise. What I can go back to is we've seen unprecedented needs for management consulting in the last 3-4 years, and as such, the consulting industry has done an amazing job in responding to being able to either provide those capabilities or the extra, I will call it, surge capacity. Will it continue this way?
Okay, Mr. Wernick, maybe you can speak to it because you're in the know of seeing how this is also playing out with. This is exponential growth, right, that we're seeing here. What is the solution to? I understand that we need management consulting companies, but this kind of growth is deeply concerning, I think, for everybody. And I guess my bigger concern is that we've got public servants right now that are struggling to pay their wages. Obviously, they're out fighting for a fair deal. And then we've got CEOs of these big companies making millions of dollars in profits at the same time. Maybe you can speak about that, because that's concerning for most Canadians, I think.
Yeah.
I would see that as an 25-second answer, I'm afraid.
It's difficult to measure because my anecdotal understanding is that a lot of boutique consulting firms have been absorbed by the bigger ones, kind of like what happened in law firms. So it may be difficult to sort of measure from time to time. I think what's happened is a growth in the amount of and volume and pace of work. And if people want to use fewer consultants, then they have to slow down and be clear on what they're willing to do less of.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bonet, I understand you have a flight to catch. We have 2 more 5-minute sessions. I'm not sure if you can stay for 10 minutes, or do you need to leave right now?
I could take another one, Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Thanks very much. We'll have you stay for another 5 minutes, and then we'll say goodbye. Ms. Block?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And while I'm happy to hear that Ms. Bonin is willing to stay, my questions are actually for Mr. Wernick.
Why don't we excuse Mr. Benet then, and we'll start your time again in a moment. Ms. Benet, thanks very much for joining us. We'll start again your 5 minutes, Ms. Block.
Well, we can if you want. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. Wernick. The increase in external contracts began on the heels of the Liberal Party forming government, as my colleague, Mr. Johns, has pointed out. In your role as the clerk of the Privy Council, were you aware of the increase in external contracts?
General view of what was happening in government, because there's something called GC Infobase, which I recommend to you, which is the costs of government. I was not the day-to-day manager of the public service. That's the Secretary of the Treasury Board. I had a general awareness, but my role as Cabinet Secretary was really getting things through Cabinet and getting initiatives launched and implemented.
So in your opening comments, you mentioned the need in ensuring an effective public service. We need to protect training and leadership budgets. As the head of the public service, would you have held that view when you were the clerk of the Privy Council?
Yes, I was appointed in 2016, and one of the first things I went to the Prime Minister with was to restore leadership programs from the Canada School of the Public Service, which had been terminated under the previous government in one of the spending reviews. The 2012 Spending Review Deficit Reduction Action Plan actually really did a lot of damage to training and leadership programs in the public service, and it was one of my priorities with my colleague, the Secretary of the Treasury Board, to restore that.
So in the article that you wrote, dated February 7th, 2023, you observed a couple things that I'm going to touch on. The first would be that you worked, and I'll quote, "I worked with several ministers who were highly skeptical of public service advice and insisted on running the issue by an outside firm with a big reputation before taking a decision." During spending reviews, ministers reflexively turned to outside advisors. Can you share with us perhaps any advice that you would have given to those ministers, or any concerns that you would have had about that view of the public service?
No, to be clear, I think it's perfectly reasonable and understandable that ministers want to have an outside perspective. If somebody comes to you and says, we're going to buy 88 fighter jets and this is what it's going to cost, the Treasury Board ministers would like to have some outside validation of the ship design, of the procurement process, of the costing, and so on. So particularly in costing, ministers want to see outside advice. I had a number of discussions with the President of the Treasury Board at the time about how Shared Services Canada was doing, and advocated for more investment in training in IT and the needs around cybersecurity and so on. So all that to say that it's important to reinvest and recapitalize the capabilities of the public service.
Thank you. I think we've all been incredibly concerned with what may be perceived or may be true about the lack of capacity building within the public service, as well as perhaps the ownership of the product that is developed when you procure the services of an external consultant. I also want to quote something from your article where you state, and I quote, "Nor is it true that private firms always do good work, as we saw with the Phoenix Pay system and with some apps such as ArriveCan." I think one of the concerns that has been raised during this study is the lack of transparency and accountability that can arise when you are procuring the services of an external consultant, and those external consultants then subcontract. And we don't have eyes on those contracts and are told we can't have access to that information. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, I think you can make recommendations. You should talk to the contract management people at the Treasury Board if you want to go into that in more detail. As I said, transparency about what's out there for tender is important. The proactive disclosure of all government contracts, which has happened for many, many years, is really important. There is an Auditor General, there is internal audit, there is a procurement ombudsperson. So if the oversight and feedback can be improved, you should make recommendations in that area.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Wernick, and also thanks to Madame Bonin as well, too, for your tremendous public service to Canada, to our country, and your exceptional work. I wanted to say, Mr. Wernick, that I do have a copy of Governing Canada. I'm about 3/4 done. And I wanted to say thank you so much for reading that guidebook, especially for new people that arrived on the Hill. It really is an excellent source of guidance. My only gripe with it is that it has a very, very small section on parliamentary secretaries, which I'm hoping that the next edition rectifies. You know, this is the 11th study of McKinsey, 11th meeting that we've had studying McKinsey, and it kind of reminds me of the movie Ishtar or Green Lantern. You know, tremendous cast of characters, star-studded, and a lot of fanfare. You know, a lot of anticipation in terms of what this study is going to yield, what entertainment, what value, and really all it's done is really all it has is led us to a collective, profound yawn. There really hasn't been any real major insights or enlightenment from these 11 meetings. We've learned a lot about outsourcing. we have an outsourcing study that's on the books. It's too bad we couldn't just simply continue with that. But it is what it is. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Wernick, pick up the thread of some of the conversations about the public sector and the public service and the tremendous work that our public servants do here in Canada and how we can help them out. You mentioned in one of your articles dated this year that to improve the way the public sector works, governments should always invest in ways to bring in fresher and more objective perspectives and advice, challenge incrementalism and orthodoxy, and help the public service craft implementable options for governments to consider. Is it fair to say that bringing in consultants with experience working in the public sector and having best practices from around the world, is that one tool in the toolbox in order to be able to achieve what you had, as you had described here in this quote?
Yes, I think the public sector, writ large, federal and provincial and municipal, always needs new ideas and innovation. It is subject to incrementalism and risk aversion, and there is a risk of a mindset of, well, this is the way we always did things. So if you want to bring in fresh perspectives, I do think there are a number of ways to do that. Certainly think tanks, foundations, and so on. Engagement with Canadians directly is an important one. But advisory firms can play a role in that. And if they've done work in that area with another government or with the private sector, then they can be a useful source. They don't always do great work, but at their best, they give public servants new ideas, new tools, new ways of thinking about things, and new skill sets.
You reminded us as well in one of your articles that about 1 in 5 Canadians work for the public sector. It's the largest employer in Canada. And you remind us as well, too, that you have public servants not just at the federal level, but at the provincial level, at the municipal level. Are there avenues for the exchange of best practices between federal public servants and between their provincial and municipal counterparts? Does that happen?
Yes, I used to have conversations with provincial cabinet secretaries on a fairly regular basis, not as much as I'd like to, and there are other forums.
But
there are groups.
Not on policy issues, but
on management.
Okay, management.
That
yes,
tended
right.
to be what we would actually get together because we didn't want to argue about climate change or some other issue. That's why I think bodies like the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, Public Policy Forum, they provide a really valuable place for people that work at different levels of government to come together and share ideas and to learn from each other. So that's one of my specific recommendations in the Globe article is invest in that supply chain. We need a more robust supply chain.
Do we create enough space in the public sector for grassroots, bottom-up innovation, sort of design thinking innovation?
There's been a lot of work on that. I can only speak to it up to 2019, but we had a group, an incubator within Privy Council office that was specifically designed to go out there and look for leading edge practices in behavioral economics and nudge and different approaches. The Treasury Board Secretariat sponsored an innovation fair at least once a year, which allowed public servants to come and pitch and a sort of Dragon's Den approach to generating ideas. So you better put that to my successors or to the Secretary of the Treasury Board. The public service has always tried to look ahead and develop, innovations. My general argument is we don't do nearly enough of that.
Got it. How much time, Mr. Chair?
You have -3 seconds.
I will. Okay.
You're in debt like the government. Ms. Sinclair Desjardins, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Warnick, you were clerk of the Privy Council until 2019? And since then, you're offering consultancy services through consultancy services? No, it's not correct. Is that not correct? Do you offer consultancy services by way of your business? Yes, I do. I have my own consultancy business. I've done a few small contracts since my departure from government. Are you of the opinion that, as certain witnesses have stated, that the public service is archaic? Well, certain aspects. No. There are over 300 organizations within the public services. Most are excellent, but some have specific problems, like the Canadian Air Force, the Armed Forces. Can you give us a few examples of archaic or... I left government 2019. I haven't lived through that pandemic as a public servant. And I do believe that the public service, both federally, provincially, municipally, behaved very appropriately during the pandemic. Well, despite all the flaws and shortcomings, I don't know if some people have received or waiting for a passport 48 hours in the rain. Well, we can't generalize on one anecdote like that. The attention of the media and often of politicians is quite explainable, and it's very easy to cast blame, but there are organizations that work very, very well. That never makes the news. Okay, other than getting an outside perspective on a number of issues, we've had to depend on consultancy firms for quite a few years. Don't you think that's a bit of an excuse? If it's costing several billions of dollars to get this outside perspective, don't you think that there's some mismanagement going on? No. I think what's at issue here is the speed of change. 20 years ago, there was no iPhone. Today's expectations of service today are really quite precise. They're looking for instant results, instant service. And that's not archaic in your mind?
I apologize. I was supposed to go to Ms. Cousset. I went over to the block. So I'll finish with the NDP, and then we'll have the last two Conservative Liberal rounds. I apologize. Mr. Johns, if you want to do 2.5.
Thank you again for being here. No, Mr. Wernick, you talked about the deficit reduction plan under the Conservative government and the cuts, which were pretty severe. And obviously, we saw outsourcing with Phoenix. We saw Veterans Affairs get cut by a third. Would you believe that a lot of the outsourcing was a result of the deep cuts to the public service? Because we saw the outsourcing double under the Conservative government, and now it's gone up fourfold under the previous under this government right now.
A more general point, I was in management after the program review of the Chrétien government and Mr. Martin's program review, and I was in government after the Deficit Reduction Action Plan. Those were totally reasonable decisions for a democratically elected government to take. You know, they're in charge of fiscal policy. My point I'm trying to get across is that often when there's a reduction in operating budgets, one of the first things that gets cut is training.
Sure, and knowledge also in the public service that evaporates. Now, what about in terms of the advice that you know, cabinet ministers were given advice, and they decided that they wanted to go with outside consultants, you know, from the public servants. Do you not see that as a you know, damaging morale and also potentially an exit of some of the senior policymakers within the
no, this would have
servants?
been in the management area, often on costing, and I don't mean that they would have directed, you know, go and hire this consultant or hire a consultant. I just think a lot of things go through the Treasury Board process, which is the Management Board of Canada, and people often want to see, and this is from all parties, they want to see some third-party validation of the risks, the costs, you know, various approaches.
I've only got a few seconds left. I really want to look at the broader issue of outsourcing, not just McKinsey. Best questions that you think that we could be asking the witnesses that come before here as we look at all of the big outsourcing companies that would improve, you know, public spending in terms of the public service and looking at this issue?
I kind of look at it from the other end of the relationship. I don't really have a lot of direct expertise in contracting and procurement and follow-up. I think that you should continue to pursue that if it's interesting to you. I did recommend, I think you should do a follow-up study on the capacity of the public service and try to get a handle on how much is the government, you know, any government investing in training and leadership development. I'm very concerned that the arithmetic of the last budget does not add up. You cannot cut consultants by that much and not affect services unless there's at least an offsetting investment in training.
I'm afraid I have to interrupt. That is our time, but bells are ringing, colleagues. I've got 30-minute bells. Yeah, that is going to. We can seek consent to do the last couple rounds with Mr. Wernick before we let you go. Is that fine, colleagues? Yes. Great. Ms. Kusi, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Wernick, I just wanted to take opposition to your comment about the Deficit Reduction Action Plan and the impact that this has had on the public service, because the Deficit Reduction Action Plan was two scenarios, one of 5% and one of 10%, and that would imply that it is in fact funding that resulted in the regression of the public service. When in fact, we look at the situation we are in today, which is a 53% increase in our bureaucracy, yet poorer public services. Immigration backlog significant, passports unavailable for those who wish to travel, obviously the inability of the current government to negotiate a strike. So I definitely do not think that a lack of money or a lack of funding is at the heart of the problems of the public service. And I think that the situation we find ourselves in here today reflects that perfectly and evidently. And, you know, certainly I myself was affected by DRAP. I was the consul to the mission at Dallas, Texas at the time. I too had to come up with 5 and 10% scenarios. But I do not correlate the Deficit Reduction Action Plan to the position that the public service is in today. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to pass my time over to Mr. Barrett. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair, if I may.
Please go ahead.
So, with just a couple minutes left, I'm going to, and noting that we do have bells ringing, if we have another opportunity to come around, I have some questions for you, Mr. Wernick. Thank you for joining us today. Colleagues, in advance of today's meeting, I did advise that the notice of motion that I gave on Wednesday, April 19th, that I would move, and that's that's been provided to the clerk. It's available in both official languages. It was circulated to all members. I'll just read it just for the context of people who are following. That's that the committee invite the deputy heads from the following entities in relation to the redactions and improper translation of documents requested by the committee on January 18, 2023. Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, Business Development Bank of Canada, Canada Border Services Agency, Canada Development Investment Corporation, Canada Post, Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, Department of Finance Canada, Employment and Social Development Canada, Export Development Canada, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, National Defence, Natural Resources Canada, Office of the Veterans Ombudsman, Veterans Affairs Canada, Privy Council Office, Public Sector Pension Investment Board and Trans Mountain Corporation, and B, invite the Office of the Law Clerk to brief the committee in public on the extent of the committee's powers to call for documents, and C, instruct the chair to send a letter to each of the entities listed in Section A of this motion to inform them that the committee is currently considering referring this issue to the House of Commons as a possible breach of privilege. So, Chair, it's about 3 minutes and 15 seconds into this questioning round, and so I don't want to delay other members' questions. Just by way of context, this motion comes from the discussions that were had over the course of 2 meetings with respect to requests made by the parties at the table, and I hope that this satisfies those requests and seek all members' support and ask if there's no questions that we put it to a vote.
I believe Mr. Jouari just has a quick comment, and then I think we can move to a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, MP Barrett. We are in support. Can I just ask for a clarification? How many meetings do you have in mind, and how do you see this calling the witnesses in impact specifically C-290 and some of the other work that we are doing?
I would add my thought was that we would ask the chair to see what resources are available so that the committee can continue its other business uninterrupted by this, and that this, I would hope that we could resolve this over a couple of meetings, and this is not a comprehensive study. This is in support of the ongoing work of the committee, so it shouldn't interfere with the committee's other business. But that's what I had in mind in answer to his question, Mr. Chair.
If I could address.
Yeah,
Sorry,
we definitely support 2 meetings and then ensuring that we leave it in your capable hand to be able to manage it with giving the priority to the other ones. And we are ready to vote.
Yep, Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a quick second. I wanted to say thank you to my colleague across the table. All of us were convinced that we can find the common ground, that common ground does exist, that we were all united in that pursuit. And I just wanted to thank MP Barrett for his work in crafting a motion really that reflects all of our voices and all of our concerns. Just wanted to say kudos, give credit where credit is due. So just wanted to say thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Hey, clerk, please.
On the motion of Mr. Barrett. Mr. Baines? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Housefather?
Yes.
Mr. Jawari?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmirchuk?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Ms. Bloch?
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi?
In favor.
Madame Sinclair Desgarniers?
Oui.
Merci. Mr. Johns? Thank you, sir.
Colleagues, thank you very much. Motion's passed. I understand Mr. Jawari just has a couple quick minutes, and then I just have one quick question, and then we'll adjourn and go vote.
Thank you, Chair, and once again, thank you, Mr. Wernick, for your service over so many years. We heard consistently that management consulting firms were brought in different areas, but their focus was on benchmarking and in helping the different departments with getting the data on some best practices based on the mandate that was given to those departments. You also, in your opening remark and a number of times after that, you specifically talked about the training public servants on leadership development as well as other areas. You talked about the training courses that you took as the clerk of Privy Council to ensure that not only you understand project management, but you understand other activity. Can you expand on what type of training and for public services would you recommend so we reduce our dependency on consultants and it's just more of how and when we need them rather than we need them on a regular basis? Thank you.
I'm going to, sorry, Mr. Wernick, I'm just going to interrupt because one of my questions was a similar one, but if you could be relatively brief, and then perhaps we'll ask if you can provide in writing a longer response, because I'm going to ask for a response in writing as well, just because of lack of time.
Yeah,
But please
I
go
mean, the
ahead.
IT course I took was about 20 years ago when I was a middle manager. I think if you want to make the best use of external contractors, it's really the middle management categories. It's project management, costing, risk management, a lot of these areas of expertise. I think in the specific field of information technology, the newest developments are always going to come from outside, from the private sector, and you will need somebody to bring that expertise and say, how do I apply this to service delivery or internal processes, within the public service? So I do think the leadership programs are crucial. It's the middle and senior managers that actually, steer and lead the organizations. And I do think the termination of the 2 big executive leadership programs in 2012 was a mistake and needed to be reversed. I'm not saying that the budget from 12 budgets ago explains what's happening 12 years later, but it's a very good example of how one of the first things to go is training and leadership development, and I hope we won't repeat that now.
question. We've seen, especially after 2019 with the COVID and with the number of challenges and gaps that it was highlighted that there was need for us to go out and quickly get the response. So the fact that the cost of the consulting increased, do you attribute to that to the opportunity that it presented us during the COVID, and also the mandate, the aggressive mandate that the government had? I know you haven't been in that position since 2019, but as an outside observer, what are your thoughts? Thank you. And that's my question. That's my last question.
Well, I mean, it's clear that all kinds of government services, both federal, provincial, and municipal, had to adapt to the pandemic, new methods of service delivery, and new methods of working with a distributed workforce. When everybody got sent home, then how do you do the internal functions of government? So everybody had to learn very, very quickly. And there are probably some very good lessons from that, which can be applied to the new normal after the pandemic, for sure. So I mean, that's the whole point, is the public sector, the metaphor I like to use, should have learning software. It should always be looking forward, looking for new ideas, learning from its mistakes, and adapting. I just, I have to warn against generalizing. There's something called the fallacy of composition that says if it's true of one thing, it must be true of the whole thing. And that's not the way the public service works. It's over 300 different organizations. Some have problems, some have issues. That does not mean the whole thing is broken.
Thank you, Mr. Jouari. Mr. Warnick, thanks for your time. I just want to ask a couple of quick questions. And the first one, maybe if you could be kind enough to provide in writing to us or write another book on it. It's regarding procurement. We have an issue that Canada has an issue, obviously, in defense procurement. One of the issues is because someone might be a deputy minister today looking after immigration, transfer the next day, and hey, guess what, you're buying F-35s. We don't have the longevity in positions or the scale that perhaps England or the U.S. does. I'd certainly love to hear from you on training issues or how we can build up a proper defense procurement staff. But I want to get back just a couple, and these might be a bit more anecdotal, but a couple of years ago I papered all of the contracts for the outside consultants, many hundreds of pages. So I went through picking out individual, and everything from auditing the Strawberry Festival to doing random RFP fairness checks repeatedly on the same RFP. And I look at that example, then I look at the nuke tech. We studied nuke tech in this committee about, it was giving a contract to or standing offer to a Chinese security company to provide scanners in our embassies. And the government stepped back from that. Was great, but they said, well, we'll investigate how it happened. And they went to my favorite, Deloitte, and gave them $250,000 for a report that basically said, don't buy sensitive security equipment from despotic regimes. So for fun, I went to West Edmonton Mall and filmed a video asking random people, would you buy, security equipment from despotic regimes? Everyone said no. And it's like, why did we pay $250,000? You talked about generalizing, and yes, there's a lot of experience these consultants have that aren't available in the public service. But how do we get past these kind of contracts of the government sending out almost CYA contracts? Like, we have a public service to do fairness checks. Why do we need to sub it out? We have a public service to say, don't buy such equipment. And we're getting rather short of time. I'm happy to have you come back. I'm happy to have you put in writing to us. But if you're able to give a quick 1-minute comment, I'd appreciate it.
A lot would have to do with the volume of work that has to be done. There's a long history of when something happens, new rules are brought in. And the new rules keep being added and added and added, and they're very rarely taken away. So, I mean, it's a big conversation, but procurement carries probably a dozen different policy objectives, from small business to regional to supporting diversity to value for money. I mean, and some of it is in very protected sectors. You're looking at shipbuilding. You can only buy from 3 suppliers. That limits competition and has its issues. So it's a very big topic. I guess the only thing I would say is by observation, I don't know of another country or jurisdiction that thinks they got it right and you could just copy and cut and paste. It's a very tough issue to balance industrial policy, value for money, and the things that the armed forces and the Coast Guard are looking for.
Great. Well, thank you again for your time. Colleagues, unless there's anything else, we will adjourn and go vote, and we'll see everyone on Wednesday. I've lost track of the days.